The argument from causality. Previously on this channel, I'm sorry to sound like a TV announcer, but previously I discussed the argument from design as a proof for the existence of God. So I thought, well, why not continue along that line today and consider the argument from causality, or sometimes known as the cosmological argument. It's based essentially on the notion of contingency, proposed, for example, by Aquinas following Aristotle. In practice, the argument goes something like this. Everything is contingent in the sense that its existence depends on something else. It may, in fact, not have existed, but it's caused by something else. Its cause must also have a cause, etc., etc., until we arrive at a so-called first cause, which is itself uncaused, or perhaps self-caused. As our friend Gottfried Leibniz would argue, it bears the reason for its existence within itself. So it's a kind of uncaused cause, right? Note that when Aquinas makes this argument, he actually states that in the order of sensible things, i.e. things that can be observed, detected by our senses, there is an order of efficient causes. Now, here's the essence of his argument. Now, to take away the cause is to take away the effect. Therefore, if there be no first cause among efficient causes, there will be no ultimate nor any intermediate cause. But if in efficient causes it is possible to go on to infinity, there will be no first efficient cause, neither will there be an ultimate effect, nor any intermediate efficient causes, all of which is plainly false. Therefore, it is necessary to admit a first cause to which everyone gives the name of God. First of all, the possibility of going on to infinity is not plainly false, as Aquinas claims. This is just an assumption. You could just as easily argue, using Aquinas' own logic, that given that everything has a cause, the idea of a first cause is plainly false. Essentially, I would argue that the conclusion of Aquinas' argument actually contradicts the premise on which it is based. He argues from the notion that everything has a cause to the conclusion that not everything has a cause, i.e. the first cause, which is itself uncaused. He would probably get around this by claiming that this first cause is not in the order of sensible things, which I would argue is not in the order of sensible things in the more derogatory sense. However, it's important to distinguish here between two types of causality: in esse causality and in fieri causality. In fieri causality, or in becoming causality, if you like, is like when you build a house. You build the house, you cause it, and it remains in existence independently from there on. There's no need to keep creating it. With respect to in esse causality, an effect requires a cause to remain in existence for as long as the effect remains in existence. An example of this would be the light from a candle. The light exists as long and only as long as the flame exists, which lasts only as long as the candle lasts. The flame maintains the light in existence. Which kind of causality is Aquinas referring to? The consensus seems to be both. Note that the in fieri type of causality, the becoming type of causality, that this leads only to a deistic idea of God, i.e. a God who creates the universe, then steps away and leaves it to run on its own. This seems to be Leibniz's view. In esse causality, in being or in essence causality, points to a theistic model of God. The universe exists because God first created it, yes, but it continues to exist only because God continues to sustain it, just as the candle flame sustains the light. However, whichever kind of causality Aquinas has in mind, one or both, the following things remain true, it seems to me. that the possibility of an infinite regression of either type of causality is false is an assumption. If you don't make this assumption, the argument falls apart. And his final conclusion contradicts this initial premise. At least, so it seems to me. The in fieri argument, the becoming argument, also breaks down because of the concept of time. Before, in the temporal sense, implies time. But if time actually only comes into being following the Big Bang, there is no before. So this no more fits into the order of sensible things than does the notion of God. So, by Aquinas' own argument, it doesn't need to fit the rule of causality that applies to sensible things. It can itself be uncaused. That conclusion is at least as plausible and reasonable based on Aquinas' own logic as the argument that God must be this uncaused cause. We don't actually have to give the name God to this uncaused cause. We can just call it the Big Bang. Note that quantum physicists face a similar dilemma. In the current model, there seem to be uncaused causes. Some physicists are very uncomfortable with this idea and posit that there must in fact be an underlying cause of these uncaused events. Potentially ad infinitum, it seems to me. But perhaps this is all a bit misguided. After all, it's not clear to me that the concept of time applies at the quantum level the way it does at the macro level. At the macro level, we can clearly discern directionality in time. Humpty Dumpty doesn't spontaneously come back together. However, at the quantum level, this is not the case. There's no problem replaying a quantum event in either direction, forwards or backwards, so to speak. The events are temporally symmetrical. Therefore, it's not really possible to say which of two events actually comes first and causes the other. It works equally well in both directions. We could argue that, as with the Big Bang, quantum events do not fall into what we regard as the order of sensible things. They're clearly not sensible to us in the way that events in the macro world are sensible to us. So, according to Aquinas at least, these events need not obey the principle of causality. Unfortunately, I think a large part of the problem here, both at the cosmological and the quantum level, is that our language breaks down. It's shaped by the observable world and is simply not equipped to speak about these boundary conditions. Even our maths breaks down here. At the moment, I don't have any solution to offer for this problem. The theoretical physicist and YouTube star Sabine Hossenfelder suggests that over time our language will adapt to speaking about this bizarre quantum reality, just as it's adapted to speaking about electromagnetic radiation, which once must have seemed just as weird. Maybe some of the problems regarding the discussion of God and God-related issues is similar in some ways, although perhaps in the opposite direction. Once upon a time, what Aquinas said may have seemed axiomatic. For instance, when he said that the possibility of going on to infinity was plainly false, this may have been entirely self-evident to him and his readers. Now, however, God talk and even philosophy talk is no longer part of our daily reality, at least not for many of us. Our language is possibly losing its capacity to talk about these concepts, just as it does not yet have the capacity to talk clearly about the cosmological and quantum realms.